Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of RANT Radio. My name's Thomas Odams, and I'm here from RANT to guide you through another wonderful show with two incredible speakers, this time talking about the wonderful world of deception technology. Here with me today, we have Ivan Foreman from Illusive and Rob Black, currently working at the Deception Lab, or the National Cyber Deception Laboratory, to be entirely precise. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming to join us. How are you handling today and the wonderful heat pouring through our windows?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, it's a beautiful day outside. Unfortunately, haven't had an opportunity to take advantage of the weather as yet. But going well, working hard, and looking forward to kicking off the discussion with you this afternoon. Beautiful.
So for those of you just trickling in now, because I know you're all still trying to fit as much G&T in your glasses as you can before we get on to the talk proper, a couple of little ground rules and a couple of bit of information. Firstly, if you go to the attachments on your right, you should find some interesting links. One will take you through to the audience chat over at the Isolation Arms, our Discord channel. That way you can go and heckle as you would at our normal pubs without directly questioning the presenters. When it comes to questioning the presenters, you will also see a question tab. There you can type in questions in real time and I will vocalize them in the style of a dodgy 80s radio show presenter. Our wonderful presenters will then answer your question if it's deemed safe, normal, and doesn't contain an absurd amount of vulgarity. Aside from that, we also have first ever, I'm going to show you a short video, which is going to give you a little bit of background on Illusive, our wonderful sponsor for this evening. And finally, a thank you all for coming to join us, mainly because with your help, we have now raised a grand total of £1,555 for the Trussell Food Trust, helping people in need at this trying time, rather than just pouring liquor down your throats at various drinking establishments, which is always good. Our wonderful speakers, let's talk about that. Ivan, obviously you're coming from Illusive. You've got a fascinating background in cyber, which I believe spans not just the UK, but also Israel and South Africa. Could you give me a little bit of background about who you are, where you've been, and yeah, that kind of thing?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So good evening, good afternoon all. Originally from South Africa, as you can potentially hear from my Safa accent. So I grew up in the beautiful seaside town of Durban, where I studied, and then made the strange and interesting idea to go live in Tel Aviv in Israel, where I kicked off my career in IT security at the time, which is now considered cybersecurity. And moved to the UK in 2001. Was actually dragged there by my wife, who dragged me kicking and said we were coming for a year. And 20 years later, we're still here. So have been in the UK for just under 20 years. Worked for a number of different organisations, predominantly in cybersecurity. Mobile security, did a stint running the security team at Cisco, and more recently joined Illusive Networks, which I am currently at. Illusive, as Tom mentioned, is in the space of deception security, and we help our customers to protect against advanced threats using quite sophisticated cyber technology, which I'm sure we'll talk about in more detail. So that's a little bit about me. I guess back to you, Tom.
And straight over to Rob. Just one question already in from the audience. It is a Zinfandel that I got in for my birthday, which was
happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Which I haven't had a reason to drink yet because we're in lockdown. Rob, talk to us about your background, where you've been.
I'm disappointed not to share in the glass with you, Tom. So happy birthday as well, and thanks very much, everyone. Good afternoon. Yeah, so Rob Black, Deputy Director of the National Cyber Deception Lab here in the UK. and also a lecturer in information activities at Cranfield University, which supports the UK Defence Academy. Prior to that, I didn't have quite an exotic career travelling around the world, but I spent a bit of time working as an MOD defence scientist, a research scientist, looking at how we achieve cognitive effects and how we shape the behaviour of our adversaries in traditional warfighting. And then in later years, realising that there was this thing called the internet, and that I could get paid for working on the internet or dealing with the internet, and understanding how that was going to shape warfighting today and in the future, and in particular how we can look at integrating our military thinking and military approaches with regards to warfighting and conflict and confrontation, and look at that with respect to our approach to cybersecurity. And that's very much at the heart of the aspiration for the National Cyber Deception Lab, where we're focusing on building a community across the championed by MOD itself, but across government, and looking at bringing tech vendors, key stakeholders, academics, people who are interested in the space of cybersecurity and the application of cyber deception, or the use of deception, to drive forward our defences with respect to shaping and manipulating the attacker's behaviour in order to defend our networks. That's probably enough of an overview from me. Hopefully that helps.
Beautiful, fantastic. Okay, so next up, we're going to show this wonderful video that the wonderful Illusive team have provided us. Just before I do so, I've got to say, as a little bit of information for our wonderful listeners, I jumped on a briefing call with our two speakers, I believe it was last week, and not only was it the longest that I've been on, but it was the most informative, with words like violence used, which I haven't heard before when we talk about cyber in at least a little while. So I'm very much excited to have you both here. Thank you so much. On to the video. Please do bear with me. Wow. Okay, that was suitably epic. I feel like that was the perfect introduction to the discussion we're about to have. Incredible stuff. I guess next step, Ivan, will be, unless you want to launch straight from that, I can give you the little bit of background that we agreed on the title and the initial thoughts to get the conversation going, and then we can just take it from there. So, deception technology, more than just hoodwinking hackers. Ask anyone in cybersecurity about deception technology, and one of the first words they may use is clever. Throwing up near infinite digital lures to appeal to an attacker is not simple. This RANT Radio show seeks to understand how the technology is rooted in military history, asking ex-service people for their opinions on the technique. It will also dig into how forward-thinking organizations are using deception tech for a range of innovative approaches, including trapping malicious insiders and preventing SOC teams from burning out. Ivan, would you like to talk to us a little bit about the topic?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, so maybe just a little bit of more of a background to how Illusive was established and where we came from and how the company was formed. about 5.5 years ago. So I mentioned before that I worked in Israel. As I'm sure many of you are aware, Israel's quite well known for a few things. One of the things is the background in cyber technology and their ability to establish some quite successful startups and be successful in selling, I guess, software to a lot of organizations around the world. What's really interesting and what intrigued me to actually join Illusive was when I heard that Illusive was actually created by an organization called Team 8. And Team 8 is an organization which, the best way to describe it, I guess, is a venture capital fund on steroids, but formed by 4 ex-military guys. So it was actually created by guys who came out of the 8200 unit of the Israeli army. And for those of you who don't know, the 8200 unit is essentially one of the largest units in the army, and every single man and woman, when they finish school, or boy or girl, when they finish school, have to go into the army. It's compulsory. And at the age, I think, of around 15 or 16, the Israeli army releases some type of psychometric exam within all the students in Israel. Got nothing to do with your academic background. And based upon the tests, they then decide who goes into this 8200 units, okay, based upon a number of questions. And so a lot of people obviously want to go into fighting units or paratroopers or various different units, but 8200 is one of the top units to go into, and only the top 1% of the population can actually go into this unit. And when they then join the unit after their basic training, they're essentially, instead of being given a rifle, they're given a laptop, and they basically become the cyber attack part of the Israeli Defense Force. And essentially, through their 3 or 4 years of compulsory service, or then if they sign on for longer, they actually partake in warfare against Israel's enemies, and there's no shortage of enemies, where Israel exists at the moment. So when they actually come out of the unit, they've got some incredible experience in understanding what it means to be an attacker. And a lot of them then come up with ideas and either create their own companies or they go work for various different cybersecurity companies. And Illusive was founded, again, by these 4 guys. It was actually the general of the unit. So the guy who actually created was one of the founders of 8200. A gentleman called Nadav Sfafir, who's an incredible speaker and very charismatic individual. And the idea was not to just create one company. The idea was they wanted to create 5 cybersecurity companies to help address challenges and issues for very large customers, which weren't being provided by a number of the vendors out there. And what they did for the first 1.5 or 2 years is that they went out and just spoke to people. And if you're the general of the 8200 units of the Israeli army, you come out of the army with quite an interesting little black book with all sorts of contacts that you've made, whether that's FBI or NSA or GCHQ or various different people who've now moved generally into the private sector. And it gives you access to speak to some of the largest security or IT security professionals in the world. So over the first year and a half, they managed to raise quite a bit of money, as you would expect, and went on to an idea of research and said, for the first period, let's just speak to customers and get ideas around what are the challenges and issues that they have. The aim, remember, was to form 5 cybersecurity companies, and Illusive was the first one. So we were the first horse out of the stable. And the problem that Illusive was identified to address was 2. Number 1, identifying when someone is in your network. So assume breach, assume whatever you spend on perimeter security, someone is going to find a way into your network. That's the first of all. So it's not around making the walls higher and making it hard to get in. Let's assume someone's going to get in. Being able to detect quickly, and not only to be able to detect quickly, but to be able to detect with very, very low false positives. Okay, those were the two criteria. So the clever guys, these attackers who've been working in the army for how many years, sat down and talked about, how can we do this? How can we create a product or a solution which identifies someone's in the network, but does it with very, very high fidelity and doesn't create lots of false positives and fatigue for the SOC and all these other products that exist out there. And that's when they came up with this idea of deception technology. So if we're able to plant information in an area somewhere on the machine which an attacker is looking for, and bearing in mind these are attackers, they're thinking like an attackers. If I'm an attacker and I land on a machine, let's say I'm really, really clever and I managed to land on your machine, Rob, and now I decide, well, I've got into the cyber deception lab. I want to now move from Rob's machine to someone else in the organization. I'm going to use tools and techniques to be able to move, obviously, on that journey through the attack process. And if I had a way of planting lots of different false data and information on Rob's machine, that would now make it really, really difficult for me, an attacker, to understand what's real and what's not. And therefore, if I did utilize one of these credentials or one of these deceptive pieces of information, and that triggered an alert, that would indicate to me that's pretty high fidelity. Okay, it's unlikely that I'm going to use something false or someone else is going to use something that isn't a deception. So that's how the idea of Illusive was founded, and since then we've expanded the offering and the company to now deal with also attack surface reduction and all other areas to increase the efficacy and the value that we bring to our customers. Realize I've spoken for probably quite a long period, so I'll shut up now and I'll hand over back to you, Tom, or to
No problem, Rob. I'm going to give you a second to collect your thoughts. Just a quick reminder, questions, objections, everything like that, feel free to send them in. I know we've just started the introductions, but important going forward, especially as we start to build this stuff up. So, Rob, over to you.
Brilliant. And I just want to, I guess, pick up on a couple of themes. One concept that you mentioned, Tom, at the very start, and one touching on the history that Ivan touched on with regard to elusive networks. You mentioned the word violence, and Ivan talked about the history of the military founders of Illusive. And I guess this is a serious topic, and I don't want to underestimate. It sounds cool, it sounds sexy, it sounds fun. We are recognizing the seriousness of the concepts that we're discussing here. The focus is on the fact that we have a fight for our survival on our hands. Let's not pretend this is anything but a fight for survival. We have the front line of today's current conflicts happening on our networks. It doesn't matter whether you're critical national infrastructure. It doesn't matter if you're military systems. It doesn't matter if you're part of the financial services. If you do not recognize that you are under attack, you are playing the wrong game. And that's our aspiration with the National Cyber Deception Lab, is to focus on considering these concepts in the context of a fight for survival. At that point, we are considering how do we use traditional military techniques, which could be military deception. It could be other ways of influencing and shaping behavior. We don't have the luxury of considering necessarily the concept of violence because we're in the virtual realm, but how do we bring those concepts to the fore to shape our engagement with our adversaries? Because that is fundamentally our jobs when we're responsible for protecting the networks. One of the reasons we're being championed by the Ministry of Defence is because they own the right to protecting their networks. They own the capabilities, the crown jewels in defending our nation. We sleep well at night because that's their responsibility. What they cannot afford to have is capabilities that are compromised. So when they go and push the button, the kit doesn't work. Or to find that the Chinese have been all over the networks, or any other attacker that you choose to pick. They've been all over our networks, exfiltrating data, building equivalent capabilities, such that when we come into combat to defend our nation, we cannot do this. So yes, it is exciting, and it's that it's the excitement and the creativity that we really want to bring to the fore here through the National Cyber Deception Lab and in the discussion. The creativity of coming up with innovative solutions in defending our networks is absolutely key, but I don't want to take these issues lightly. We are in a fight for survival, and if no board is considering that they are in a fight for survival when it comes to investment in cybersecurity, they are missing the trick. Proactive defense of our networks brings us to the fore these questions. How do we go about defending our networks in an age when we don't have recourse to traditional measures that we usually use? We are amongst predators out there. If it's not today, it might be tomorrow. So how do we go away, or how do we move ourselves from a victim just waiting to be picked off, and hopefully we might get ahead of the curve by knowing that they're coming because we're using some effective firewall security or whatever it might be? How do we move from being a victim into that situation where we can defend ourselves properly? Our answer, our solution, is a much more proactive use of some of our technologies, and that is deception technologies. It's moving away from just using it for intelligence purposes, understanding that there's an opportunity to gain that insight and that intelligence on the attacker, the techniques they might be using, or what they've been doing when they're attacking a fake network thinking it's the real. How do we use deception to actually change their behavior when they're inside our territory, when we can manipulate their experience, when we can manipulate their existence in our networks? How can we get them to do what we need them to do, which is move away from or choose not to pursue attack or doubt the very things they're after us? And Ivan's example of the fake data is a perfect example. How can we get them to question everything they're looking at, everything they're taking? How do we get them to undermine their own confidence in their own performance, in what they might be stealing, what they might be acquiring, such that it doesn't make it worthwhile for them to continue? And this is why I think it's a really exciting topic, but I don't want to underestimate the importance and seriousness of this as well. So hopefully that gives it a good overview to start with.
Absolutely. It's a great overview, Rob. So thank you so much for that. When it comes to the National Cyber Deception Lab, I'm sure there's one or two of our listeners who might not actually have any idea that the government was running a deception lab or backing one in the first place. Would you be able to give us a little bit of background on what you guys have been up to, just a potted history, if you could?
Sure. Very quick potted history. We were formed and established last year, so we've been around for a very long time in cyber terms. And our aspiration is to become the nexus for cyber deception in the UK primarily, but perhaps across our global partners, for the use of cyber deception in proactive cyber defense. And by that, I mean our focus is in developing the conversation, moving it forward from where we're currently seeing the conversations with regards to deception, in order that we can move our customers and Ivan's customers, military stakeholders, commercial stakeholders, whoever it might be, move them into being more demanding of the deception technology vendors, move them to be more demanding of the solutions they're asking for, move them away from just comparing product A and product B, because that one's there and that one's available, and actually going, what do I need? What do I want my attacker to do? What experience do I want to give my attacker when they're coming towards me? And how can I create that with the technology that's available? And at that point, when we can move that conversation forward, and that's why we're championed by the MOD, we've got cross-government stakeholders, we've got technology vendors, private research, over 20 or so partners already signed up, and academia as well. The aspiration is to move that conversation so that we can expedite the reality of these or the realization of these capabilities, bring them to the fore, bring them to reality, bring them into use. Again, we don't have time to sit on our hands to do nothing. We are in a fight for survival. We need to have more appropriate, more proactive defense measures utilizing deception. In terms, I'm just thinking about your question, sorry. In terms of what we've done, we had an initial kickoff symposium last year. We've got another symposium scheduled for November this year. More information can be found at cyberdeception.org.uk, or get in touch. We've been slightly throttled, I'm sure, as everyone has been, with regards to COVID-19 and trying to facilitate those conversations in a virtual space rather than in a physical space. But yeah, we've been going around our MOD and government stakeholders, understanding where they're currently at with regards to deception, understanding where they want to currently be, and how we can help them move that forward. We've been facilitating research conversations, engaging with different bids from everything from IoT security and CNI security through to effective the use of deception in or evaluating the effectiveness of deceptive techniques. So we've had a range of different initiatives, activities that have been kicking off underneath us, and hoping that we'll be able to report back on more deliberate progress as soon as we can. Really.
Great stuff. So, Ivan, do you have a response to that? Would you like me to move on to our first question?
I mean, maybe just to add, I think to one of the things that Rob touched on, I think during our last discussion, is deception has been around for thousands of years, and Rob's 100% correct. We are at war. We're at war every day from a cyber perspective, and deception has been used as a tool to be able to help in warfare. Going back to thousands of years. So it's amazing that not many more organizations have thought about this as an approach to be able to help and improve the way that they protect against their networks. And I think that really what we're trying to do as a company, together with our various different partners, and I guess as part of this process even is to help educate our customers out there that using this technology is not complicated. You don't have to have all of the basics and all of the bells and whistles in place. This doesn't have to be super advanced. This can be deployed across your organization fairly simply, and it can be super effective. So I think from just an opening statement, I think you should just open your minds and think about, do you have deception, or do we have technology, or are there any gaps in our existing framework? And one of the things that we often suggest to organizations to look at, I don't know how familiar you guys are, but we often reference the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is a framework used by a lot of organizations to look at how they're protecting their network. And it's part of the Lockheed kill chain. So the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain has got various different elements, and the MITRE ATT&CK framework is a portion of that, and it analyzes how you protect your network against various different types of processes or various different types of threats. And the best way to understand, if an organization says to me, do we need deception? Are we protecting ourselves enough? I would basically say, have a look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework and understand specifically. If you look at, I think there's the section 6 to 9 of that framework. If an attacker is trying to come in and goes through this various different process, have a look at those sections and understand, do you have the necessary tools in your arsenal to be able to protect your organization across that? And there's various different components which we can help in being able to address it, specifically around lateral movement and deception. Definitely can help address a number of different factors, but specifically basic stuff that most organizations probably haven't thought of. So just a suggestion to look at that, and I'd be happy to take that offline and provide various different documentation and information around that particular point.
Which is a very good point, actually, well made at a crucial time. If there are any questions that I don't get round to, if you would like to continue the conversation with our two wonderful speakers, when you go and rate our show as 5 stars, you can also leave a comment. Alongside that, you can ask to be introduced to either of our speakers, and I will do my best to make sure that happens. Cool. So we've actually got a really meaty question as the first one to kick us off, which looks wonderful. Do you see, I'm going to put this to both of you, and whoever leans back the most is the one that's going to get asked first. Do you see any ethical limits to the use of deception? Or does the idea of a fight for survival mean any method to any extreme is acceptable?
Shall I jump in first with a response, given I was talking about the fight for survival?
Exactly.
I guess, before answering that question specifically, in talking about the seriousness of these concepts, the whole aspiration about the NCDL, the conversation that we're hoping to enable with our stakeholders, and I would reinforce that, the NCDL is outside of government, but we have government stakeholders, is to facilitate this conversation, to encourage transparency, to encourage accountability on these topics. We are talking about risk management here. We are talking about the management of some very difficult decision makings at very critical times. Ethics is absolutely fundamentally part of that. Understanding the ethical application of any defensive posture should be absolutely critical. So I would completely and utterly encourage an ethical consideration of what you're choosing to do and not choosing to do. I think my worry is that quite often we're not actually engaging in that conversation. And picking up on Ivan's point about the MITRE attack framework, I absolutely agree. That's a good starting point. I would actually go one step further and ask an even more simpler question. What is it in terms of the experience that you want your attackers to have when they are considering your network as a target, or when they're operating in your network? If you're not thinking about what experience they're having, you're missing what defensive measures you want to put in place. And that's the first question. And at that point, if you're not thinking about that, then I think there's a whole world of opportunity, creativity that you could bring in. But if you're just sitting there thinking, I've got some defenses, I'm hoping they're not going to attack me, fingers crossed, they're going to go to someone else, and you're not thinking about how we can engage in that conversation, that relationship, and that decision-making that attacker's having, then I think we're missing the trick. And at that point, you then get into a transparent conversation, a risk management process, where we start looking at the ethical application of whatever defensive measures you put in place. And in that case, I think deception is equally as a valuable tool.
Yeah, and just if I could add, I don't think, with the type of solution that at least we're talking about, there aren't any major ethical issues. We're not talking about now fighting back and launching any attack back into the customer's network, or planting any type of Trojan or ransomware, so that when they now go back onto their machine, that causes issues. Our solution and the concept here is about changing the way that attackers behave, and shifting the paradigm here. Okay, so there's often when I talk about this and I speak to customers and we speak to lots of different people, they talk about attackers only have to be right once, defenders have to be right 100% of the time. That's always the challenge. If you think about the analogy of a poor goalkeeper and a striker can miss 50 times, but that poor goalkeeper, the one time that striker manages to the goalkeeper's dropped the ball or hasn't saved it effectively, that's what's going to be remembered. So exactly the same concept here is, imagine if we could change the scenario so that there isn't one goalkeeper, there are now 10 goalkeepers, and the attacker doesn't know, which is the right goalkeeper to shoot at. From an ethical perspective, we're not talking about, we're talking about changing and manipulating your own data from a customer perspective, so that an attacker doesn't know what to do or where to go once they've landed. So once they're on your property, so you talk about, I'll talk South Africa, I'll give the South African analogy from a crime perspective, is that if someone comes onto your property and now tries to go up your stairs, or go into your children's bedroom, or do anything, you have the ability and the right to defend yourself on your property. And exactly the same way here, from a cyber perspective, if someone's on your network, you have the ability to manipulate the data and change stuff so it's more difficult for them to move. We're not talking about making any major attacks and attacking back and causing damage to them. We're just talking about making it more difficult, so that either they will fail or they'll think about what they need to do so that they won't come back next time. So that's the concept here. I know Rob's got some views on, we chatted about this, if you wanted to go a little bit further around attacking back, but that's not what we're talking about at the moment. It's very much with just manipulating the data and putting, rather than using the technology honey pots, we talk the analogy here of honey glaze. Imagine if you could take all the honey out the pot and basically spread it all over your network. And then when the attacker lands, they don't know what's real, they don't know what's not. And you can identify them really, really quickly on. That's the concept.
I think I might offer, I think this is a really important conversation to be having. What are the ethical considerations we need to be having here? We've got a situation, we've got a virtual domain. In referencing, we know what the ethical considerations are with regards to the use of violence in the physical world. We know where the rules are with regard to violence. We know what the rules are with regard to use of violence in warfare. But here we are in a space, in a virtual space, a man-made created environment, a matrix, for want of a better word, in our own networks. So here we're in a situation where, what are the ethical considerations we need to apply in these spaces? And if you pick up the example that Ivan used, if we created fake data in our network and allowed them to take it back into their network and it turned out to be dud information, have we caused them any harm, or have we just wasted their resources? At which point could we deliver a capability that would allow them to really undermine their desire to go and get more information from us? The CIA had a fantastic operation, counterintelligence operation in the 1980s. They knew that the Russians or the Soviets at the time were exfiltrating large amount of technical data, and they seeded false and fake technical information, fed it back. The Soviets took it, built a pipeline as a result. The pipeline went bang. The explosion was seen from space with corrupted material, all because they didn't have the ability to corroborate the information they were extracting. At this point, there's a situation here where all we've given them is false information, false data that they might have been acquiring anyway. Have we done anything wrong? Now, I'm not promoting one course of action or another. I'm suggesting that this is the stage to have the ethical discussion conversation so we can ensure we've got that transparency. At the moment, we have a real resistance to having a conversation as to where does hackback start. We deviate away from hackback and we focus on cybersecurity, and then passive cybersecurity at that. Our focus of activity is in expanding out from passive cybersecurity to look at what our proactive measures are, defending our own territory. So how do we go about defending the defenders? How do we go about putting necessary measures in to actually afford that defense that we need? And that's where we think we've got that real focus, particularly with the MOD in particular, where that's their responsibility, that's their day job. They are the legitimate guardians of the nation. And at that point, they have to take defensive measures to protect our crown jewels or whatever it might be. So actually in that space, they have the responsibility to consider how best to deploy whatever they need to deploy in the networks and have it as transparent and ethically robust as possible.
Very interesting. So I think we've got one that's here for you, Ivan. So while understanding that a breadth of deception techniques throughout the network is important, do you have any favorite quick win techniques or technologies that tend to be valuable? Oh, sorry, you've muted yourself, Ivan.
Sorry. So in terms of, quick win from a deception perspective, they're, deploying deception technology across a very large organization. It doesn't happen overnight. Although we've got a actually very, very large customer who actually made the decision to deploy it overnight very recently because they were actually under attack. So amazingly, it can be done if you have the will and the want to be able to do it. In terms of quick wins or examples of how we've deployed it and how customers have got value out of it immediately, I'll probably give you the example of, let's go back 2.5 years approximately to the Bangladeshi bank attack. I don't know if many of you remember that. So this was the story of a hacking group who managed to get into the Bangladeshi bank Swift bank transfer system and transfer millions and millions of dollars out of there before they even realized it. And I think they managed to pick it up very, very quickly. They managed to pick it up eventually, and just due to some mistake on the hacker side, he got away with millions rather than billions. From a deception perspective, we've actually got a really interesting type of deception, which is based around Swift. So you have the ability to deploy Swift deceptions to all of the machines, to all of the users who are actually connected to your Swift payment system. So this isn't deploying something on Swift itself, but it's actually deploying deceptive Swift credentials and information to all of the users who actually access Swift. And in that way, if now anyone triggers an alert for a Swift deception, you know that they're trying to access stuff that they shouldn't. And a lot of our large financial organization customers actually started using Illusive on the back of the Bangladeshi bank attack. They said, wait a second, what's to stop someone else from not getting access to our Swift system and being able to do something similar? So from a quick win, rather than going ahead and deploying Illusive to hundreds of thousands of machines, which we do have for many of our customers, I could say, choose a part of your network or choose a system or a particular thing which you consider to be vulnerable and deploy deceptions to that. And that could be a really, really quick win, and you could see value out of it very, very quickly.
Tom, can I offer a quick win as well?
Absolutely. We have 4 questions outstanding. So make it a quick one. We might be able to answer everyone.
Okay, my quick win is tell people you're considering or you're deploying deception. And Ivan and I talked about this last week. Tell people that you're going to see Illusive. Tell people that you're going to other commercial providers of deception technology. At that point, people know that you might be using deception, people start double guessing whether or not the stuff they're getting is real or whether they're already in some kind of deceptive trap. The easiest thing to do is overlook the decision-making of the adversary or the attacker and to focus on the deception technology. The deception technology crudely is a prop. It's that experience that we need to focus on. So the quick win is to get them double guessing before they've even arrived on your network. And at that point, they don't even know what's real, what way's up, what way's down, and you've got a much better opportunity to take control. That would be my quick win.
Perfect. So one in, this is fascinating. I'm just wondering how it works in practice, particularly as I think sometimes those working in security can be so self-confident they become naive to being a weak link. This was slightly earlier on, but the conversation's moved on pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if I can just touch on that, and there's two very contradicting points of view around advertising the fact that you are using deception in your organization. Some of our customers, and fortunately we don't have many of them that are willing to be public references, but we've got a few, and I'll even give them a call out if it's okay, Tom. So we've got Oak North Bank in the UK, which is a case study customer, and happily references us and tells customers they're using Illusive and deception with a view to exactly what Rob mentioned. The people are going to think, they've got a deceptive solution in there, maybe we should go ahead and attack another bank, and that's going to be much more complicated and difficult to attack. The other example we have is actually one of the largest hospitals in Israel, which is a hospital called Asuta, which actually recently implemented Illusive to help protect against client data and all the stuff that is going on in their hospitals. And they had a very similar view that if we advertise and let people know that we're using Illusive, this is going to help increase the security, and they're going to go after one of those other hospitals which doesn't actually invest in this type of solution. So I think it's super important that from our perspective, that if customers are willing to implement it, then they talk about it. We have the other extreme where customers turn around and say, not only are we not going to talk about it publicly, we're not going to let anyone in the organization know. And we've got one example of a very, very large organization in the US, which I think only 2 or 3 people actually knew that they deployed deceptions. And the reason for that was they suspected an insider. Okay, they had a particular incident, they suspected an insider, and they wanted to deploy deceptions to be able to root out this insider, and therefore they made sure that they came up with like a special name. They didn't mention Illusive, they called it Project X or whatever it is, and that was the secret name for deploying the solution, with only a few people involved in pushing it out. So that's another way that you could go. But obviously, I'd prefer if you were able to implement to references publicly from that perspective.
Brilliant. So here's another one for you, possibly for you, Rob. Given that the UK's Computer Misuse Act deems any hackback as a criminal offence, where does that leave commercial enterprises, given that the best form of defence is attack?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on, I don't think that this is really hackback, what we're talking about. A hackback is the next step, or maybe something in the future. We're not suggesting. We're just manipulating our own data to make it more difficult for attackers to move and be able to identify when someone's in the network. So rather than going through the haystack of thousands and thousands of SIM logs and user analytics, being able to identify someone's doing something, getting high fidelity alerts based upon deceptive data. This isn't hacking back. It's just shifting the paradigm to make it easier to identify someone's in your network. That's at least that's my perspective.
Brilliant.
I'll offer perhaps a reflection there. I think we've got to up the conversation at the board level, to be honest. If we're in a situation where we're currently adopting passive civilian approaches and we're expecting someone else to defend us, then we're missing the opportunity to be more deliberate in our defense of our networks. I'm not saying we should be focusing on breaking laws at all, but our focus with the NCDL is about supporting the military stakeholders who have a responsibility to protect those crown jewels, those assets that we cannot afford to be compromised. At that point, you've got to recognize this is a complex area. There's some really difficult decisions to be made. And we're in that situation where you cannot just rely on a passive approach, civilian approach. We need to be able to support those who are making tough decisions in the approach to defending us and our assets. And at that point, we have to consider a range of different options. Hackback is at one end of the spectrum, but actually, just because we're anti and fearing hackback doesn't mean that there's a wealth of other options in the gulf between passive civilian approaches and more aggressive defense. We're not even treading in that more aggressive defense space because we're too scared to mention it, just in case it pushes towards the concept of hackback. We're nowhere near there yet, but we haven't even explored the problem space or the opportunity space.
Interesting. So here's our first question, directly name dropping one of the speakers, which is always a fun part. Well, Ivan would say this is ethical, as it's defensive rather than offensive, malware, etc. And because it responds to attackers, but could or would it include adopting deceptions that are not on closed/secure systems and only available to hackers, and therefore less ethically mislead legitimate journalists and researchers? So there was a lot of brackets in there, and
yeah, I mean, I think the concept here is not about planting information on the web or even in the dark web to go ahead and identify people are doing dodgy stuff and trying to catch out reporters or all sorts. The concept here is protecting against the crown jewels of an organization, and that may be from a bank, it may be your SWIFT servers or your payment systems, and if you're a pharmaceutical organization, the latest formula for your interesting new cure, which could be pretty valuable these days considering what's going on. So it's very much around protecting a company's network. Now, could that be on the cloud? Yes. Could it be in a private cloud or a public cloud or in some type of container? Yes, it could be, because today, it's not just around the data and information which you're trying to protect is not just stuff in your perimeter and in your network. It may exist on a cloud platform, whether that's public cloud or private cloud. So we have the capability to not only deploy deceptions on-prem in your network, but also have the ability to deploy it in cloud environments. And that's been driven a lot by our customers who've said, that they want the capability of being able to push and deploy deceptions in those scenarios as well. But it's not around trying to fool people into opening documents and then getting them to do stuff which they shouldn't. It's about protecting the organization and making sure that these malicious actors or malicious insiders don't get their hands on stuff which is going to cause problems for you and your organization, and cause a breach which no one wants to happen today.
Tom, can I offer a reflection? I think we're looking, perhaps that question in particular is looking at something which, again, is focused on a technical asset, and you deploy it, you drop it off, and it has an effect. I really want to encourage our audience to think about deception as that protracted long-term relationship with the attacker. So you are going to be doing a series of activities, both within the closed and secure systems that are only available to people who shouldn't be in that network. So if they are, and they're detecting material or playing or being exploited by our deceptive plays, that's one thing. But you're also going to be using activities outside that space that may or may not be real, because it's not a binary option. This is deploying information to shape the decision-making and the behavior of the adversary. So you're putting material out there in order for them to piece it together in their head, so that when they're inside the areas they shouldn't be inside, they're going to make sense of the world very differently. So I would really encourage us to think it's so much more than just an on-off switch with regards to deceptive assets and whether that deceptive asset is appropriate or not. It's about understanding that relationship, managing that experience. Crudely, if you want to joke about it, it's about putting them into a matrix, a man-made virtual reality that is your network. At that point, you're going to have a series of plates being spun that you are in control of. And all of those will lead to the individual making sense of the situation in a particular way. And that's what you want them to do. The journalists, the other people who are, the researchers who might be looking for those information pieces are going to see a very different experience, because they're not getting the picture that you're presenting to that hacker who's deep inside your network, as well as the material outside. So do think about it much more holistically than just playing a play here, a deceptive play there. Think of it much broader.
Perfect, thank you. So this is going to be the last question I take, so please don't send any in. I will publicize their contact details for our wonderful speakers after this at their request, so they can you can carry on the conversation there. After this, we're going to have some closing comments and then retire to the virtual pub. So yes, please, no more questions. Ivan, I think we should probably kick off with you here. Are there any drawbacks to advertising the fact that you are using deception, e.g. increased attacks as attackers want to test their skills at detecting and or defeating deception? I guess the question is there a bit of a giant killer syndrome afflicting hackers who know that Illusive is in place and want to, sharpen their skills?
Yeah, so honestly, the answer, at least from an Illusive perspective, is we're super confident that if you do advertise the fact that you use Illusive, it's not going to make a difference in the attack. And I'll give you a few examples of how we found that, or real life scenarios of customers who've actually done red team exercises with us and actually have said, you know what, we're going to get a red team to actually try and test if they can get past Illusive. And as the first phase, we're not going to tell them that Illusive is there. And the second phase, we are going to tell them Illusive is there, and see if they can get, if they can do some research and they can bypass and they can identify what's effective and what's not. In all of the cases, and we've had over 100 red team exercises with some pretty big customers, we've never had a situation where we weren't able to detect the attacker, even once the attacker knows that Illusive is being deployed. Having said that, it depends on the deception technology and the vendor, I guess, which you have in place. And I'm not here to badmouth any other technologies out there, but I must say that some other solutions are maybe a little bit easier to fingerprint, and maybe the way that they deploy the deceptive environments, it may be possible to identify, if you've landed on a honeypot or if you've landed on a deceptive system. So I would just say it depends on the type of technology, and it's the type of the vendor that you deployed. From an Illusive perspective, we always encourage our customers as much as possible to advertise the fact that they have deployed deception. We don't see any downside because we're extremely confident in our ability to continue to protect them, even if attackers know that deception is in.
Rob?
I've reinforced a lot of those comments. I'd also say there's been some fascinating research just coming out of the US, looking at how, or looking at deception research and looking at how people are reacting to the deployment of deception or deception assets. And repeatedly, the research is showing that actually it's much more effective should the attackers know that there's deception assets in play in terms of disrupting their behavior, disrupting their abilities. That reinforces the work of Richard Hoare a few years ago, talking about the psychology of intelligence analysis. The expectation of deception is a play in itself. If people are expecting to be deceived, it's shaping their decision-making and it can be manipulated. It brings them into the game for you to have a greater effect. So I think there's very few opportunities, or very few disadvantages. When you come to the giant killing debate, the question is, what can you afford to lose? So if you are a giant and you can be killed, then you have something to protect. If you're not taking adequate measures to protect it, then it doesn't matter whether you're deploying deception or not, you're going to get taken out. So actually, you need to change your mindset. This is not a cost-benefit analysis comparing option A, option B. This is you asking yourselves the question, what can you afford not to lose? And at that point, thinking about how you best defend that. Wow,
that was such a cracking close. I feel like really bad to now ask you if you have any closing comments.
I certainly got other points I can add, so I'll try and add something that adds to it as well. But Ivan, I don't know if you want to respond first or how we want to do it. Sorry, I don't want to hold the mic.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, just a few closing comments, and I did see a few more questions come in, so maybe I'll try and incorporate some answers into the closing comments as well. I think, the perception is from a lot of customers when we come in and talk about deception and trying deception, deploying deception. I guess the perception number one is that it's super expensive, and honestly, it's not. The second perception is that you need to have all of your basics in play. and be doing everything right before you deploy this on top as well. And I would honestly say that that's also not the case. You know, we've had a lot of customers who basically said, you know, let's deploy this as a mechanism because we don't have a lot of resources. We don't have a huge SOC team with lots of analysts to be able to look at all of the logs. We don't have, you know, even thinking now in COVID times, you know, your SOC with all of the different screens all over the place. You know, everyone's now working from home and with one screen, if you're lucky. Never mind having access to all of those different systems. So I would say, you know, imagine if you could have you know, invest in this type of technology, which is really like the big red button on the wall. Okay, it's going to tell you if someone's in the house. There's this German customer that always uses this analogy. Is a fox in the hen house? This was his analogy, which he always used to say to me. You know, can you tell if there's a fox in the hen house? You know, what is that one thing that's going to be able to tell you that you've got someone inside your network? And honestly, this is a super easy to implement solution. You don't have to have all of your basics. It's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. You know, reach out to us, speak to us, get my details from Tom, or come to our website or whatever it is, and we'd love to have a follow-up conversation with you and do a demo and give you some real examples of how our customers have deployed and are seeing value in what we're offering. So thanks again for your time this afternoon. I'd love the opportunity to take it forward and have additional conversations with you. Thanks very much, Tom, as well.
Thanks, Ivan. No problem whatsoever. Rob?
I just got a couple of points, if I may. I say we'd love to follow up this conversation with anyone as well, and if we can help, come and visit us at the National Cyber Deception Lab. Always happy to entertain discussions. I guess I want to leave us on the point that, you know, it's a phrase that we've been using a lot recently. We're in unprecedented times, mainly due to COVID. But let's forget COVID for the moment. We need to realize we're in unprecedented times with respect to our security. There is no longer a distinction between war and peace, particularly so when it comes to cyberspace. We are in this fight for survival, as I mentioned. The enemy is already amongst us. The average time or dwell time on a network is 80 to 90 days already. How is that acceptable? They're already embedded on networks. We need to have confidence in our kit and our crown jewels when we need to use them, and we need to ensure they're protected. So we are fighting this war for our home territory. We need to change the rules of combat, change the rules of engagement, and be prepared to consider those costs and those sacrifices that we need to make. And we cannot afford not to make in order to do that defense. And when you start thinking about changing those rules, I think you move into a space where you start considering the opportunity that cyber deception really offers. And we're not even beginning to see the real potential here. We could get to the point where you can achieve deterrence through a recognition or realization of mutually assured deception, to the point where you're having this counter bluff and bluff scenario where people are beginning to not even enter into your territory because they don't know what's going to happen next. We've got the real opportunity to shape our understanding of a virtual network. At the moment, everyone thinks computers don't lie. The Hackers Manifesto perfectly touched on this. Computers don't lie, people lie. We've got the opportunity with deception technology now to recreate an environment that can manipulate that environment for the attacker. When we start getting into that space and you start stage managing their experience, you've got the real opportunity to shape what they do next and how they go about doing what they do. And that's when you're on the front foot in cyber defense. That's the opportunity we've got when you recognize we're in a fight for survival. If you don't see us in a world where we're fighting for our survival, it's very difficult to justify the extra cost that's involved. And that's probably how I finish.
Lovely. Rob, thank you so much for joining us. Ivan, thank you so much for coming to join us. A couple of bits before we go. Obviously, if you enjoyed today or if you didn't enjoy it, feedback is the most important thing because it bumps us on the Bright Talk algorithm either way. So please do give some feedback. If you do have specific questions or you'd like to be introduced in a more formalized manner, please put either Rob or Ivan's name on there and I will make sure that I introduce you via email following the talk, so we can carry on the conversation that way. Please do keep your eye out for our messages after the show, where we'll be linking through to some of the stuff Illusive was doing, where I'm sure we'll be able to do some fun bits. And beyond that, it's an extremely hot day. I hope you're all enjoying your drinks. Thank you so much for coming to join us and helping us raise £284.35 for the Trussell Trust Food Trust, which is wonderful stuff. With that, I'm going to leave you all to go and enjoy your evenings and run out of your various offices, children's rooms, patios and kitchens, and I look forward to seeing you on our next show. Many thanks, everyone.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Cheers.